September 14th, 1943, 0730 hours. Luftwaffe Test Facility, Rechlin-Lärz, Mecklenburg. Major Wilhelm Schröder walked across the dew-covered grass toward the captured American fighter that sat isolated at the far end of the airfield. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning looked alien among the German aircraft. Two booms extended back from the central nacelle, each housing a massive Allison engine. Twin vertical stabilizers rose from the rear of each boom. The tricycle landing gear gave it an oddly modern appearance, nose high, as if eager to leap into the sky. Behind him, intelligence officers carried files containing 3 weeks of analysis, performance estimates extracted from combat reports, tactical assessments from pilots who had survived encounters with the Lightning over the Mediterranean and now increasingly over France. Schröder had exactly 45 minutes of fuel, 45 minutes to answer the question that was causing panic among Luftwaffe operational planners. Could Germany's frontline fighters defeat an American Escort with twin engines, counter-rotating propellers, and combat radius that seemed to defy the laws of physics? He didn't know that what he was about to discover would reveal not just an engineering advantage, but a fundamental American approach to air warfare that Germany had never anticipated. By September 1943, the air war over occupied Europe had reached a critical phase. American heavy bombers were striking targets deep into France and Western Germany. The 8th Air Force was building strength daily, adding new bomb groups, new crews, new aircraft, at rates that German intelligence found difficult to believe. But the bombers themselves were not the primary concern for Luftwaffe planners. It was their escorts. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had entered service earlier in 1943, providing escort to the edge of German-controlled airspace before turning back due to fuel limitations. German fighter tactics had adapted quickly. Let the escorts reach their fuel limit, wait for them to turn back, then attack the unprotected bombers. The system worked. Bomber losses climbed through summer 1943. American crews called the runs into Germany suicide missions. Loss rates on some raids exceeded 10%. At that rate, a bomber crew's statistical chance of completing their required 25-mission tour approached zero. Then, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning began appearing in significant numbers over Europe, and the calculations changed. The P-38 had been flying combat missions since late 1942 in North Africa and the Mediterranean. Luftwaffe pilots there had engaged it with mixed results. Some German pilots reported it was easy to outmaneuver in a turning fight. Others reported it could dive away from any pursuit and climb back to altitude faster than any German fighter could follow. Intelligence reports were contradictory and confusing. What was not confusing were the range figures. The P-38, when fitted with external drop tanks, could escort bombers 300 miles from its base, spend time in combat over the target, and return home. That range exceeded any single-engine fighter in service with any air force in the world. It exceeded German twin-engine fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf-110, which were too slow and unmaneuverable to survive against Allied single-engine fighters. The P-38 somehow combined the range of a twin-engine aircraft with the performance of a single-engine fighter. German aeronautical engineers could not understand how this was possible. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Statistics from August 1943 told a disturbing story. On August 17th, the 8th Air Force launched the first Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission, a double strike deep into Germany, targeting ball-bearing factories and aircraft plants. The mission was the deepest American penetration to date. Luftwaffe fighters attacked in waves once the P-47 escorts turned back at the German border. 60 American bombers were destroyed, 600 aircrew killed or captured. From a German perspective, the mission proved that unescorted bombers could be defeated through aggressive fighter attack. But something else happened that day, something that Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring refused to believe. P-38 Lightnings equipped with drop tanks appeared over the target areas, more than 150 miles inside German-controlled territory. They engaged German fighters. They provided cover for the bombers during the most vulnerable phase of the mission. Luftwaffe squadron commanders reported the contacts immediately. Twin-engine American fighters far beyond where any escort should have been able to reach. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland compiled the reports and presented them to Göring. The response was immediate and dismissive. Göring declared it impossible. American fighters could not have reached that far inland. The reports must be errors, perhaps damaged German aircraft that pilots mistakenly identified, perhaps captured German twins being flown by Allied pilots. Under no circumstances were American fighters reaching the heart of Germany. Galland protested. He showed combat reports from multiple squadrons. He explained the drop tank system that extended range. Göring gave him a direct order. American long-range fighters were not a strategic threat. The Luftwaffe would continue current doctrine. The matter was closed. But the matter was not closed. The P-38 kept appearing, and Luftwaffe pilots kept dying. Major Wilhelm Schröder understood this context better than most. At 32 years old, he was one of Rechlin's senior test pilots with over 2,000 flight hours in more than 40 aircraft types. Since 1941, he had evaluated every captured Allied aircraft that came into German hands. British Spitfires and Hurricanes, American P-40 Warhawks and P-39 Airacobras, even a Soviet Yak-1 captured on the Eastern Front. His reports were detailed, technical, and valued by operational units because he focused on practical combat implications rather than abstract performance numbers. He had test-flown a captured P-38H Lightning in July 1943, an aircraft from the 12th Air Force that had force-landed in Tunisia after sustaining damage during a ground attack mission. The aircraft had been shipped to Rechlin for evaluation. That initial flight had been brief, only 30 minutes, focused on basic handling characteristics and systems familiarization. The P-38F had impressed him immediately. The tricycle landing gear made ground handling easier than conventional tail draggers. Visibility from the cockpit was exceptional. The twin Allison engines provided smooth, reliable power, but the aircraft he tested in July was an early model without the improvements that were appearing on P-38's over Europe in September. The Lightning, sitting in front of him now, was a P-38H, a much more capable variant. It had been captured intact in early September when the pilot became disoriented in bad weather over France and landed at what he thought was an Allied airfield. German ground crews reached him before he realized his error. The pilot was now a prisoner. His aircraft was now Germany's opportunity to understand what made the Lightning so effective. Rechlin Test Center sat on the shores of Lake Müritz in Mecklenburg, roughly 100 miles north of Berlin. It was Germany's premier aviation testing facility, equivalent to Wright Field in the United States. The facility had tested every significant German aircraft design since 1933 and had become increasingly important as the war progressed and captured Allied aircraft needed rapid evaluation. By September 1943, Allied bombing had not yet seriously damaged Rechlin's infrastructure. The runways remained excellent. The workshops were fully staffed. The technical library contained detailed intelligence on Allied aircraft development. The night before the test, Schröder reviewed every piece of intelligence on the P-38H. It was significantly improved over the F model he'd flown in July. The H model used Allison V1710-89 engines, each producing 1,425 horsepower. The earlier F model had produced only 1,300 horsepower per engine. The difference seemed modest on paper, but translated to noticeably better climb rate and high-altitude performance. More importantly, the H model featured improved intercoolers and oil cooling systems that addressed overheating problems that had plagued earlier Lightnings in the Mediterranean. Maximum speed was listed as 402 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Service ceiling was 44,000 feet, higher than any operational German fighter. Rate of climb was 2,900 feet per minute at sea level, matching or exceeding most German single-engine fighters. Range with external drop tanks was staggering. The P-38H could carry two 310-gallon drop tanks under the wings. With those tanks, ferry range exceeded 2,300 miles. Combat radius, accounting for takeoff, climb, combat maneuvering, and reserves, was estimated at 650 miles. That meant the Lightning could escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. Every major German industrial target was now within reach of escorted American daylight bombing. The armament was concentrated in the nose: 4 50-caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon, all firing through the propeller arc without synchronization issues. The concentrated firepower meant the P-38 could deliver devastating bursts without needing to account for gun convergence. Everything went where the nose pointed. American intelligence files suggested the P-38 pilots called it putting the hose on target. Schröder's test plan was methodical. He would evaluate the P-38H's performance across its entire flight envelope, then compare each metric against the Messerschmitt Bf 109G and Focke-Wulf 190A, Germany's frontline fighters. The test would take 45 minutes, limited by fuel load. German ground crews had fueled the Lightning to roughly half capacity to ensure Schröder could complete the evaluation and return safely. Every minute had to count. He understood the stakes. If the P-38 could truly escort bombers to any target in Germany, Luftwaffe doctrine would need fundamental revision. Fighter units could no longer wait for escorts to turn back before attacking. They would have to engage the escorts first, fighting through screens of long-range fighters to reach the bombers. That meant accepting higher losses. That meant dogfighting the escorts instead of using hit-and-run attacks on bombers. That meant abandoning the tactical advantages that had made German fighter operations successful. At 07:15 hours, he began his pre-flight walk-around. The P-38's design was immediately striking. The central nacelle, a pod really, housed the cockpit, armament, and nose wheel. 2 booms extended rearward, each containing an engine, supercharger, radiator, and fuel tank. The twin booms converged at the tail assembly, which featured 2 vertical stabilizers and rudders connected by a horizontal stabilizer. The design looked strange to eyes accustomed to conventional single-engine fighters, but Schröder recognized the engineering logic. By mounting the engines in wing booms instead of the fuselage, the Lightning's designers created a stable gun platform with concentrated firepower in the nose. There was no propeller in front of the armament, no torque from a single engine to complicate high-speed maneuvers. The counter-rotating propellers, left engine turning one direction and right engine turning the opposite direction, cancelled out torque effects entirely. The landing gear was tricycle configuration, unusual for fighters in 1943. Most operational fighters used conventional tail-dragger arrangements, but the tricycle gear gave the P-38 better ground handling, easier takeoff and landing characteristics, and excellent visibility while taxiing. German pilots trained on tail-draggers often ground-looped during takeoff or landing when they couldn't see over the nose. That wouldn't happen in a P-38. At 07:30 hours, Schröder climbed into the cockpit. The seating position was comfortable, more spacious than German single-engine fighters. The instrument panel was well laid out, logical, with engine instruments for each engine arranged symmetrically. Throttles for both engines were mounted on the left console, landing gear lever on the right, flap lever below that. He strapped in and began cockpit checks. Fuel quantity showed 210 gallons per side, roughly 420 gallons total. The drop tanks had been removed for this test flight. Without external tanks, endurance would be approximately 2 hours at cruise power. That gave him adequate margins for a thorough evaluation. He adjusted his oxygen mask and checked his knee board where he'd written performance benchmarks for the Bf 109 G6, Germany's primary high-altitude fighter. Time to 20,000 feet, 7 minutes 30 seconds. Maximum speed at 25,000 feet, 386 miles per hour. Those were the numbers the P-38 had to beat or match. 07:32 hours. He signaled the ground crew. Starting the engines required a specific sequence. He started the left engine first, priming the fuel system, engaging the starter, watching the propeller begin to turn. The Allison V-1710 coughed once, then caught with a deep, powerful rumble. Blue smoke puffed from the exhaust. The engine settled into a smooth idle at 1,000 RPM. Oil pressure came up immediately. Temperature gauges showed normal. He repeated the process for the right engine. Within 30 seconds, both Allisons were running smoothly, their combined sound creating a distinctive, low-frequency throb that was completely different from German inline or radial engines. Schröder checked temperatures and pressures. Oil pressure, 60 pounds per square inch on both engines. Oil temperature, 40 degrees Celsius. Coolant temperature, 50 degrees Celsius. All normal. He advanced the throttles slightly. Testing response. Both engines accelerated cleanly, immediately. The Lightning shook gently as power increased. He pulled the throttles back to idle. He released the brakes and taxied toward the active runway, using differential throttle to steer. The nose wheel steering was responsive, much easier than tailwheel aircraft that required careful rudder and brake inputs. He could see directly ahead over the nose, a luxury German fighter pilots did not have. The taxiway was clear. Wind was light, coming from the west at approximately 5 miles per hour. Perfect conditions for a thorough test. At the runway threshold, he ran through final checks. Elevator trim set to neutral, aileron trim neutral, rudder trim neutral, flaps set to takeoff position, 10 degrees, propellers full fine pitch, mixture full rich, superchargers automatic. He glanced at his kneeboard. The P-38H's published takeoff distance was 1,300 feet. Rechlin's main runway was 7,200 feet. He had ample margin. 0739 hours. Minute 0. Takeoff. He pushed both throttles forward smoothly to take off power. 44 inches of manifold pressure. 2,600 RPM. The acceleration was immediate and strong. The Lightning surged forward, both engines roaring. The nose wheel lifted at 60 miles per hour. At 90 miles per hour indicated, he pulled back gently on the yoke. The P-38 lifted off smoothly, much more gently than he expected. The climb angle was impressive. He retracted the landing gear, feeling the slight drag reduction as the wheels came up. He raised the flaps. The Lightning accelerated smoothly. He noted the time and began his evaluation. 0742 hours. Minute 3. Initial climb assessment. Schröder established a climb at 160 miles per hour indicated optimal for the Allison engines, according to the pilot's manual captured with the aircraft. The rate of climb indicator showed 2,800 feet per minute at sea level. Excellent performance. He cross-checked against his notes. The Bf-109G achieved approximately 3,000 feet per minute at the same conditions. The German fighter had a marginal advantage in initial climb rate, but the difference was negligible. What struck him immediately was how smooth everything felt. Both engines ran without vibration. The controls were light and responsive. The visibility was extraordinary. He could see in nearly every direction, below, above, to both sides. There were no blind spots. In combat, that visibility would be a significant advantage. He leveled at 3,000 meters, approximately 10,000 feet, and ran basic handling checks, banking left and right at various speeds. The ailerons were surprisingly light, much lighter than German fighters. The P-38 rolled crisply, without the heavy, sluggish feeling of most twin-engine aircraft. He executed several quick reversals, rolling from hard right bank to hard left bank and back. The Lightning responded instantly. The roll rate was exceptional for an aircraft this size and weight. 0748 hours, minute 9. Speed test at 10,000 feet. He pushed both throttles to maximum continuous power and waited for the speed to stabilize. The airspeed indicator climbed steadily. 320 miles per hour. 350. 370. It settled at 392 miles per hour, indicated at 10,000 feet. He checked his notes. The Bf-109G achieved 375 miles per hour at the same altitude. The Lightning was 17 miles per hour faster at low altitude. That was a genuine advantage, though not decisive, but Schröder knew low-altitude performance didn't matter for escort operations. Combat over Germany happened at 20,000 to 30,000 feet, where the bombers flew and where German interceptors climbed to attack them. He needed high-altitude data. 0751 hours, minute 12. Climb to combat altitude. He pulled the nose up and established a maximum continuous climb. Both Allisons roared as he climbed through 15,000 feet. He monitored engine temperatures carefully. Oil temperature, 80 degrees Celsius. Coolant temperature, 90 degrees Celsius. Both well within limits. The intercoolers were working perfectly, keeping intake temperatures low and maintaining engine power at altitude. At 18,000 feet, he noted something significant. The engines were still producing strong power. There was no noticeable decrease in performance. The superchargers were compensating for the thin air, maintaining manifold pressure. He passed 20,000 feet at 0758 hours, exactly 19 minutes after takeoff. He checked his notes. The Bf-109G reached 20,000 feet in approximately 7.5 minutes. The Lightning had taken more than twice as long. That seemed like a significant disadvantage. But Schröder realized the comparison wasn't fair. He'd been running speed tests at lower altitude. Even accounting for that, though, the German fighter clearly had better climb performance to 20,000 feet, 0803 hours, minute 24, high-altitude speed test. Schröder leveled at 25,000 feet and pushed both throttles to maximum continuous power. This was the critical test. At this altitude, where bomber formations flew and where most combat occurred, the P-38 needed to prove its capability. The speed built slowly in the thin air, 340 miles per hour, 360, 380. The airspeed indicator climbed past 390 and finally stabilized at 404 miles per hour indicated. He converted indicated airspeed to true airspeed mentally, accounting for altitude and temperature. At 25,000 feet, the P-38H was achieving approximately 440 miles per hour true airspeed. He checked his notes again. The Bf-109G achieved 386 miles per hour true at the same altitude. The Lightning was 54 miles per hour faster at combat altitude, 54 miles per hour. That wasn't a marginal advantage. That was decisive. If a German pilot tried to chase a P-38 at 25,000 feet, the American could simply push his throttles forward and accelerate away. The German fighter could not catch him, could not force combat, could not do anything except watch the Lightning disappear into the distance. 0809 hours, minute 30, energy retention test. This was the test that mattered most for evaluating combat effectiveness. Schröder climbed to 28,000 feet, then rolled inverted and pulled into a steep dive. The Lightning accelerated rapidly, 420 miles per hour. 450, 480. 500. The controls remained responsive. No buffeting, no tendency to tighten up. At 20,000 feet, he pulled back hard into a maximum performance zoom climb. The G-forces pressed him into the seat. His vision narrowed slightly at the edges. The P-38 groaned, but held together, climbing steeply on momentum alone. He watched the altimeter spin upward. 22,000 feet, 24,000, 26,000, 28,000. The aircraft finally stalled at 33,500 feet. He'd gained 13,500 feet on momentum alone. That energy retention was extraordinary. He ran the numbers in his head, based on performance data he'd tested previously. A Bf-109G executing the same maneuver would zoom to approximately 31,000 feet, perhaps 2,500 feet, less than the Lightning. That difference meant the P-38 could convert speed to altitude more efficiently, climb back to fighting altitude faster after an attack, maintain energy through multiple engagements. 0815 hours, minute 36, combat simulation and tactical revelation. Schröder set up a simulated intercept profile based on standard Luftwaffe doctrine. Start at 30,000 feet, dive on a target at 25,000 feet, simulating an attack on a bomber formation, execute a firing pass, then climb back to altitude to set up another attack. He rolled into the dive. The Lightning accelerated past 450 miles per hour. At 25,000 feet, he simulated a 3-second gun pass, then immediately transitioned to full power climb. Both Allisons roared. The P-38 clawed for altitude at an impressive rate. At 28,000 feet, 1 minute into the climb, he was still climbing at over 2,000 feet per minute. At 30,000 feet, he checked his stopwatch. 2 minutes, 40 seconds to regain altitude. That was when the full tactical picture became clear. Schröder understood immediately what made the P-38 so dangerous. It wasn't any single performance metric, it was the combination. The Lightning was faster than German fighters at altitude. It had better energy retention. It could convert speed to altitude more efficiently, and most critically, it had the range to stay in the combat area for extended periods, while German fighters had to carefully manage fuel to return home. If he was flying a Bf-109 and encountered a P-38 formation, what were his options? Option 1, attack from above, dive on the Lightnings, attempt to surprise them. But the P-38's exceptional visibility meant surprise would be difficult, and if the American pilots saw him coming, they could simply accelerate away. The Lightning was faster in level flight. He couldn't catch them. Option 2, attack at co-altitude, try to engage in a turning dogfight. But that assumed the P-38 pilot would accept the engagement. If the American chose to disengage, he could use his speed advantage to separate, then climb back to altitude faster than the German fighter could follow. The German pilot would be forced to break off or risk running low on fuel while chasing an enemy he couldn't catch. Option 3, attack from below, climb up toward the formation from underneath. But the P-38's superior high-altitude performance meant it could maintain altitude easily while the German fighter struggled in the thin air. And the Lightning's pilots, with their exceptional visibility, would see him coming with plenty of time to position for a counterattack. Every scenario ended the same way. The P-38 pilot could dictate the terms of engagement, fight only when advantageous, disengage at will. The German pilot had no good options, and that was before considering the range advantage. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Lightning could escort bombers deep into Germany, spend 30 or 40 minutes in combat over the target, and still have fuel to return to England. A Bf-109 attacking the same bomber formation had perhaps 15 minutes of combat time before fuel considerations forced a return to base. If the German pilot engaged the P-38 escorts instead of attacking bombers, if he spent his limited fuel fighting the Lightnings, he might drive them away temporarily. But then what? The escorts would simply re-engage after the German fighters withdrew to refuel. The bombers would continue to the target unmolested. The strategic calculus was brutal. Germany could not win extended air battles over its own territory when the enemy had fighters that could remain in the combat area 3 times longer than German interceptors. 0820 hours, minute 41. Testing the twin-engine advantage. Schröder spent his remaining fuel testing specific aspects of the P-38's twin-engine configuration. He shut down the right engine completely, simulating battle damage. The Lightning handled the asymmetric power surprisingly well. He had to apply slight rudder trim to compensate for the left engine's torque, but the aircraft remained controllable, even maneuverable. He could maintain altitude easily on one engine. He could even climb slowly at about 300 feet per minute. He restarted the right engine and shut down the left. Same result. The P-38 flew comfortably on either engine alone. That redundancy was a significant advantage. A single-engine fighter that lost its engine became a glider. The pilot's only option was to bail out or attempt a forced landing. A P-38 pilot who lost one engine could fly home. That meant American pilots who sustained engine damage over Germany had a reasonable chance of returning to England. German pilots who sustained engine damage over their own territory often died anyway because they couldn't maintain altitude long enough to reach an airfield. He tested another aspect that intelligence reports had mentioned, the counter-rotating propellers. With both engines at high power, there was no torque effect, no tendency to roll or yaw. The Lightning flew straight and true. In a high-speed dive or a maximum performance climb, when single-engine fighters struggled with torque and control forces, the P-38 remained perfectly balanced. That made it an exceptionally stable gun platform. American pilots could track targets through aggressive maneuvers without fighting their aircraft's tendency to torque roll. 08 24 hours, minute 45. Return to base. Fuel was reaching reserve levels. Schröder throttled back to cruise power and began his descent toward Rechlin. As he flew the approach, he mentally composed his report. The conclusions were clear, and they were deeply troubling for Luftwaffe operational doctrine. He landed at 08 27 hours, exactly 48 minutes after takeoff. The tricycle landing gear made the landing effortless. He simply reduced power, held the nose up, and touched down on the main wheels. The nose wheel settled gently. No bounce, no swerve. He taxied to the ramp, where ground crew and intelligence officers waited. He shut down both engines and sat in the cockpit for a moment, staring at the instrument panel. The P-38H had performed flawlessly. That was part of the problem. The aircraft had no hidden weaknesses, no surprises that might give German fighters an advantage. It was exactly what it appeared to be, a fast, long-range, heavily armed escort fighter with performance that matched or exceeded Germany's best interceptors, and America was producing them by the hundreds. He climbed down from the cockpit and walked directly to the technical office. The report took 6 hours. 15 pages of detailed analysis, performance charts, tactical assessments. The opening summary was brutally honest. The Lockheed P-38H Lightning represents a fundamental challenge to Luftwaffe air defense operations. Its combination of speed, altitude performance, energy retention, and extraordinary range cannot be matched by current German fighters. Most critically, its operational radius allows it to escort bombers to any target in Germany and remain over the target area for extended combat operations. This capability renders obsolete our current tactical doctrine of waiting for escorts to turn back before attacking bomber formations. He detailed the performance comparisons. Speed at 25,000 feet, P-38H faster by 54 miles per hour than the Bf-109G. Energy retention, P-38H superior by approximately 20%. Range, P-38H 650 miles. Combat radius versus Bf-109G approximately 200 miles. Single engine survivability, P-38H can fly home on one engine, Bf-109G cannot. But the most important section was the tactical analysis. Schröder wrote, "The fundamental problem is not performance margins, though those favor the P-38 significantly. The problem is operational flexibility. The P-38 pilot can choose when and where to fight. The German pilot cannot. This asymmetry is decisive." He continued, "German fighter doctrine emphasizes aggressive attack, tight formations, and rapid engagements before fuel limitations, force withdrawal. This doctrine assumes rough performance parity with enemy escorts or the ability to avoid escorts entirely by timing attacks after they turn back. Against the P-38, neither assumption holds. Performance parity does not exist. The P-38 is faster, has better energy retention, and superior high-altitude capability, and the P-38 does not turn back. It escorts bombers throughout their entire mission profile, from English airspace to the target and return. Then came the conclusion that would prove most controversial. The twin-engine configuration provides the P-38 with advantages that single-engine designs cannot match. The redundancy of twin engines means battle-damaged aircraft can return home. The counter-rotating propellers eliminate torque effects, creating a stable gun platform. The concentrated nose armament, with no synchronization issues, delivers devastating firepower. Most importantly, the twin engines enable the range that makes the P-38 strategically decisive. A single engine, powerful enough to provide comparable performance, would be too large, too heavy, or too complex to be practical. The Americans have solved the Escort problem through intelligent engineering and industrial capability. He added a final section on production and strategic implications. Intelligence estimates suggest American P-38 production exceeds 300 aircraft monthly. This number will increase as new production facilities become operational. German fighter production of all types totals approximately 1,000 aircraft monthly, but this includes training aircraft, night fighters, and ground attack variants. True interceptor production is perhaps 400 to 500 monthly, even if we achieved performance parity with the P-38, which we do not. The numerical disparity makes sustained operations impossible. Schröder submitted his report through channels on September 15, 1943. It went first to Rechlin's technical directorate, then to the Reichsluftfahrtministerium in Berlin, and eventually to General Lieutenant Adolf Galland himself. The response came within 10 days. Schröder was summoned to Berlin for a meeting with senior Luftwaffe staff officers. The session took place in a windowless conference room in the Air Ministry building. 3 colonels attended, none of whom Schröder knew personally. They questioned every conclusion methodically, looking for flaws in his analysis. Your assessment assumes the P-38 will always have the advantage of surprise and position. In reality, our radar network provides advance warning of bomber formations. Our fighters can position for advantageous attacks. Schröder responded carefully. Radar provides warning of bomber formations. Yes, but the EP-38 Escorts fly at the same altitude as the bombers, often slightly above. Our fighters must climb through 25,000 feet to engage. During that climb, we are vulnerable, slow, and highly visible. The P-38 Escorts can engage us during our climb before we reach attack position. What about turning performance? Twin-engine aircraft are typically inferior in turning combat. The P-38 does turn slightly wider than our single-engine fighters at low speeds, but at high speeds, above 300 miles per hour. The P-38's roll rate is exceptional. The pilot can reverse direction faster than we can follow, and if the engagement doesn't favor him, he simply uses his speed advantage to disengage. We cannot force him to remain in a turning fight. Your range calculations assume the P-38 operates at maximum efficiency. Combat maneuvering consumes fuel rapidly. Surely their endurance is less than your estimates suggest. Combat maneuvering does consume fuel, but the P-38 starts with such enormous fuel capacity that even accounting for combat consumption, it can remain over German territory for 30 to 40 minutes. Our fighters have 15 minutes of combat time before fuel considerations force withdrawal. That difference is strategically decisive. The meeting continued for 2 hours. Every aspect of Schröder's report was challenged, but none of the objections addressed the fundamental reality. The P-38 could escort bombers anywhere in Germany. German fighters could not prevent this. Tactical doctrine would need to change, or losses would become unsustainable. Finally, the senior colonel spoke. Your technical observations are noted. However, your tactical conclusions are premature. The P-38 is only one type among several American escorts. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains their primary escort fighter, and that aircraft has limitations we can exploit. Your report overstates the threat. Schröder understood immediately. The report was being minimized, not because the analysis was wrong, but because accepting it would require admitting that Luftwaffe doctrine was obsolete, that German fighters could no longer defend Reich airspace effectively, that the air war was entering a phase where American numerical and technical superiority would become overwhelming. The senior colonel continued, "This report will be classified, secret, and distributed on a limited basis. You will not discuss these findings outside official channels. Operational units do not need to know technical details that might affect morale." The meeting ended. Schröder returned to Rechlin, knowing his assessment would be filed away and ignored. But reports have a way of circulating regardless of classification. Within weeks, Copies of Schröder's evaluation were being passed among fighter units through informal channels. Pilots shared information that official command wouldn't provide. By October 1943, many Luftwaffe pilots knew they were facing an escort fighter with capabilities that exceeded their own aircraft. The knowledge didn't help. They still had to fly the missions. The combat record validated Schröder's analysis with brutal efficiency. In October 1943, the 8th Air Force launched a series of deep penetration raids into Germany, all escorted by growing numbers of P-38 Lightnings. On October 14th, another Schweinfurt raid resulted in catastrophic losses for both sides. The Americans lost 60 bombers, but crucially, the loss rate was declining compared to the August raid. The reason was clear in Luftwaffe casualty reports. German fighter units reported engaging P-38 escorts throughout the mission profile, far deeper into Germany than previous escort coverage had extended. Jagdgeschwader 26 lost 8 aircraft attacking the bomber formation near Frankfurt. 5 pilots killed, 3 wounded. Their combat reports described being bounced by P-38's diving from altitude while the German fighters were climbing to intercept the bombers. Jagdgeschwader 11 lost 6 aircraft over the target area. 4 pilots killed, 2 captured after bailing out. Their squadron commander reported that P-38 escorts maintained position above the bombers throughout the engagement, preventing German fighters from executing their preferred high-altitude diving attacks. Every attempt to position for an attack on the bombers brought immediate response from the Lightning escorts. By November 1943, the pattern was unmistakable. American bomber formations striking targets in western and central Germany had fighter escort throughout their missions. The old doctrine of waiting for escorts to turn back no longer applied. Luftwaffe fighters had to engage the escorts first, fighting through screens of P-38's and P-47's to reach the bombers. The cost was enormous. Between October and December 1943, Luftwaffe fighter losses in the West averaged over 200 aircraft monthly. Pilot casualties were even worse. Many experienced flight leaders and squadron commanders died during this period, their tactical knowledge and combat expertise irreplaceable. Oberleutnant Klaus Mitusch of Jagdgeschwader 26 was killed on December 8, 1943, during combat with P-38 escorts near Bremen. He had 72 kills and was one of Germany's most successful fighter leaders. He was 26 years old. His squadron reported he was shot down while attempting to position for an attack on B-17 bombers. P-38 escorts engaged him from above during his climb. He did not bail out. Hauptmann Hans Philipp, commander of Jagdgeschwader 1, was killed on October 8, 1943, near Noordhoorn in the Netherlands. He had 206 kills, making him one of Germany's highest-scoring aces. He was shot down by P-47 Thunderbolts while attacking a bomber formation. He was 23 years old. These were not novice pilots making mistakes. These were the Luftwaffe's elite, men with years of combat experience, hundreds of missions, tactical expertise built through constant combat. They were dying because they were fighting an enemy with numerical superiority, technical advantages, and operational flexibility the German doctrine could not counter. Adolf Galland compiled monthly casualty reports and production figures. The data told a story of systematic attrition. In September 1943, the Luftwaffe lost 193 fighters in the West. In October, 224. In November, 238. In December, 253. The trend was accelerating. Worse, the ratio of experienced pilots to novices was collapsing. In September, approximately 50% of fighter pilots had more than 6-month combat experience. By December, only 35% did. The Luftwaffe was losing its most valuable asset, the experienced pilots who could survive combat and train the next generation. New pilots arriving at operational units had minimal training, often less than 200 total flight hours. They faced American pilots with 400 to 500 hours of training. The skill gap was enormous. The outcome was predictable. New German pilots survived an average of 5 to 7 combat missions before being killed or wounded. Galland sent detailed reports to Göring, to the Air Ministry, to anyone in the chain of command who would listen. He described the crisis in clear terms. American long-range escorts were destroying the Luftwaffe fighter force through systematic attrition. P-38 Lightnings and P-47 Thunderbolts could escort bombers throughout German airspace. German fighters could no longer avoid the escorts or time their attacks for after escorts turned back. New tactical doctrine was needed immediately. Fighter production needed to increase dramatically. Pilot training needed expansion, despite fuel shortages. The Me-26 jet fighter should receive top priority for deployment. The response was bureaucratic delays and empty assurances. Göring refused to acknowledge the severity of the crisis. The Air Ministry issued directives calling for improved morale and more aggressive tactics. Nobody addressed the fundamental problem that German pilots were outnumbered, outperformed, and increasingly facing opponents in superior aircraft with better training. Then, in December 1943, something new appeared that made the P-38 threat seem manageable by comparison. The North American P-51 Mustang entered service as a long-range escort. The P-51 had even better high-altitude performance than the P-38, superior speed and comparable range when fitted with drop tanks. But for the purposes of understanding the P-38's impact, what mattered was that by late 1943, American strategic planners had solved the escort problem definitively. They had not one, but multiple types of long-range fighters that could protect bombers throughout their mission profile. The P-38 Lightning had been the first to prove the concept. It had demonstrated that twin-engine fighters could combine the range of heavy aircraft with the performance of interceptors. It had forced Luftwaffe doctrine to adapt under the worst possible circumstances during active operations with inadequate time to develop effective countermeasures. Major Wilhelm Schröder continued testing captured Allied aircraft through 1944. In March 1944, he flew a captured P-51B Mustang and submitted another detailed report documenting its capabilities. In July 1944, he tested a captured P-47D Thunderbolt. Each report reached the same conclusion. American fighter technology and production capacity had surpassed Germany's ability to respond effectively. By late 1944, Schröder's reports were being read by operational commanders who used them to develop new tactics for surviving combat rather than winning it. The focus had shifted from defeating American escorts to avoiding them long enough to attack bombers before being shot down. In April 1945, as Soviet forces approached Rechlin from the east, Schröder flew west and surrendered to American forces. His expertise was immediately recognized. The United States Army Air Forces recruited him to evaluate captured German aircraft and provide insights on Luftwaffe tactics and training. After the war, Schröder worked as a technical consultant for several American aerospace companies. He provided detailed information on German aviation development, flight testing procedures, and combat assessments. His wartime reports on Allied aircraft became primary sources for aviation historians studying comparative aircraft performance. In interviews decades later, Schröder was remarkably candid about his September 1943 P-38 evaluation. When asked if he thought his report could have changed the outcome of the air war, he replied, "No, the report documented reality, but reality was that Germany could not match American production capacity. Even if we had developed perfect tactical responses to the P-38, the Americans were producing fighters faster than we could shoot them down." The P-38 proved that American engineering had solved the long-range escort problem. After that, it was only a matter of time before German air defenses collapsed. He added, "What made the P-38 strategically important was not that it was the best fighter. The P-51 was probably better in pure performance, but the P-38 was, first, it appeared in numbers over Europe in mid-1943, exactly when the strategic bombing campaign was escalating. It forced us to change tactics before we were ready. It proved that American bombers could strike any target in Germany with effective fighter protection. That psychological impact was as important as the aircraft's performance. Modern analysis confirms Schröder's assessment. The P-38 Lightning was not the highest-performing American fighter of World War II. The P-51 Mustang ultimately achieved greater success as an escort and air superiority fighter, but the P-38 was critical during the crucial period of mid to late 1943, when American strategic bombing doctrine was being validated or disproven. The Lightning proved that long-range escort was feasible. It demonstrated that twin-engine fighters could perform escort missions effectively. It forced the Luftwaffe to abandon defensive tactics that had been working and adopt new approaches under combat pressure. Total P-38 production exceeded 10,000 aircraft. Approximately 1,800 served in the European theatre at various times, with peak strength of around 400 operational aircraft in mid-1944. The Lightning flew over 130,000 combat sorties in Europe. P-38 pilots claimed over 1,500 air-to-air victories in the European theatre. Losses were significant. Approximately 1,700 aircraft lost to all causes, but the exchange ratio favored the Americans substantially. The lesson transcended aviation technology. Schröder's report documented something broader than fighter performance. It documented the industrial and strategic reality of World War II. Germany could produce quality. The Bf-109 and Fw-190 were excellent fighters, but America could produce quality at scale and with logistical depth that made losses sustainable. The P-38 proved that American industry could develop specialized aircraft, put them into production quickly, train pilots effectively, deploy them operationally, and sustain combat operations indefinitely. Germany could not match any aspect of that system. The twin-engine configuration that German engineers initially dismissed as unsuitable for fighter operations proved to be strategically decisive. The redundancy of twin engines meant damaged aircraft could return home, preserving trained pilots. The fuel capacity enabled operational radius that single-engine fighters could not match. The counter-rotating propellers and nose-mounted armament created a stable, accurate gun platform. The Americans had identified requirements, developed innovative solutions, and executed production and deployment at scales that German planners thought impossible. Schröder's 45-minute test flight on September 14, 1943, revealed a truth that Luftwaffe command struggled to accept. The air war over Europe was being decided not by pilot skill or tactical doctrine, but by industrial capacity and engineering innovation. The P-38 Lightning represented an American approach to warfare that Germany could not counter. Identify the problem, engineer a solution, produce it in overwhelming numbers, deploy it effectively, sustain operations regardless of losses. One test pilot, 45 minutes of flight time, 15 pages of honest assessment. The truth was documented. The truth was minimized. And by the time German command fully acknowledged the scale of the threat, it was far too late to develop effective responses. The P-38's twin engines were not just a design feature. They were the enabling technology that made long-range escort feasible in 1943, before more advanced single-engine designs like the P-51 reached full operational capability. Those twin engines, spinning in opposite directions, cancelling each other's torque, burning fuel to push the Lightning 650 miles from base and back, represented an engineering philosophy and industrial capacity that Germany could not match. Wilhelm Schröder understood this after 45 minutes in the cockpit. He documented it clearly. He warned operational commanders what they would face. His report was classified, minimized, and largely ignored until combat losses made denial impossible. The broader strategic lesson remained relevant long after the war ended. Technical excellence matters. Tactical innovation matters, but in industrial warfare, the side that can produce adequate solutions at scale, deploy them effectively, sustain operations despite losses, and adapt faster than the enemy can respond, will prevail, regardless of individual technical advantages. The P-38 Lightning was not invincible. Skilled German pilots shot down hundreds of them throughout the war. But for every Lightning lost, 2 more rolled off American production lines. For every American pilot killed, 3 more graduated from training schools. The mathematics of attrition favored the side with deeper reserves, better logistics, and industrial capacity to sustain losses indefinitely. Schröder's September 1943 report captured this reality in technical language: speed differentials, energy retention calculations, range comparisons. But underneath the technical data was a simple truth. Germany was fighting a war it could not win, because the enemy had solved problems German engineers thought were impossible and was producing solutions faster than German forces could destroy them. The P-38's twin engines made it possible. American industry made it unstoppable. Major Wilhelm Schröder died in 1989 at age 78. His legacy was honest, technically rigorous assessment of over 50 Allied aircraft types during World War II. He flew the P-38 Lightning once for 45 minutes in September 1943. It was enough to understand that individual pilot courage and tactical innovation could not overcome systematic industrial and technological advantages. That lesson, documented in 15 pages and filed away by commanders who were not ready to hear it, remained as relevant at the end of the 20th century as it had been in the middle of the 20th. Technical superiority matters less than the ability to produce, deploy, and sustain adequate solutions at scale. The P-38 proved that principle in the skies over Europe between 1943 and 1945. One test flight provided all the evidence needed. The rest was simply a matter of whether anyone with authority would listen and act on what the evidence showed. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.